Hi, in this video, I want to talk to you guys about the quality of qualitative research. Many times in your life, people will pay you for information, either because you work for them. Let's say your boss wants you to research what customers like about your product, or because they hire you as an external consultant. But the bottom line is this: if they pay you for information, it better be good. So, we're going to talk about four criteria or four standards of quality that applies to specifically qualitative research. They are credibility, transferability, dependability, and confirmability. And we're going to talk about each of them in turn. The first criterion is credibility. That is the truth value of your data and of your findings. So you should ask yourself a question: do I have the complete information? And is my information true for the participants? Many times in life, we wear a mask, really. We don't tell people everything about ourselves because we feared that we're going to be rejected, or we just want to have some privacy. And in many situations, that is particularly apparent. So let's say that your boss sends you on the factory floor of your company to ask how satisfied factory workers are with their jobs. And you go in wearing your nice suit and tie, or just suit if you're a woman, and a recording device, and you walk amongst the factory workers asking them, how much do you like your job? So think about, are they going to tell you everything they think about their job in that situation? Are they going to tell you accurate information? So here are some ways in which you can enhance and establish your credibility. There's quite a few of them because credibility is probably the most important element of the quality and qualitative research. So there's going to be 9 different things you can do to assure credibility. Let's talk about each of them in turn. First, you want to spend enough time in the field. That means either observing people or interviewing people or going through documents, whichever your method is. But you have a field experience that is long enough and that's varied enough so that you get enough information, enough observations, that you get a complete picture of what's going on. Another thing you can do is you can sample observations at different points in time, because a lot of times human behavior changes depending on the time of the week, the time of the day, and so on and so forth. Let's say you want to see how hotel employees treat their customers. They may be very different on a Monday and very different on Friday when they're getting ready for the weekend. You would want to sample your observations of the same employees throughout the week to keep that in mind. Another great tool, and it's actually something that you should always do if you're engaging in a longer research project that's qualitative, is a field journal. A field journal allows you to reflect on yourself, to reflect on what you're doing in the study, on your strategies, on your thoughts about it. So it's really like writing a journal, only a journal about your study. Every time you do something for your research project, you write it down in that journal. So it's also a log of what you're doing. And that becomes another way to show to whoever is going to be reading your report, this is what I've done. And you should make it available to your client, customer, boss, or whoever else is reading your research if they ask for it. So if they ask for your reflexive journal, you can say, okay, here it is. Have a look what I did. If you remember, we talked about self-reflection when we talked about participant observation. So it falls within the same realm. Then probably one of the best strategies to assure qualitative research quality, not just credibility, but all quality, is triangulation. And that means using different ways of collecting data, for instance. So in addition to observing hotel employees, you could also interview each of them and ask them about, what do you think are the good ways to approach your customers? What works for you? What doesn't work for you? You could also look at textual data. Let's say read some emails that these employees have sent to customers. Typically, such emails are available for examination because the management collects them. Triangulating means combining different ways of gathering data. You could also use different ways of analyzing the data. So it could be just an in-depth examination You could try and even numerically summarize some things that are coming up as trends in your data, count the number of times that you participants say a certain thing. So it's different ways of collecting, analyzing data. Triangulation also means including more than one researcher in the process. So if you and another person or two other people are collecting and analyzing the data, it's three pairs of eyes, and that's always going to give you better information. All right, let's talk about some more credibility strategies. The next one is called member checking. Member checking is taking your observations, everything you wrote down, everything you came up with through analysis, taking it back to your participants and asking them, does this ring true for you? So I've seen that you seem to struggle with disgruntled customers. Is that an accurate observation? And they can tell you, oh, yes, I really do struggle, or no. So that's member checking. And as long as you're working with real people, you can take your observations back to those people and ask them if what you've seen is accurate. Another way of checking the credibility of your data is have another researcher examine your work. It's called peer examination. It's like an audit, basically, of what you've done. And they can tell you if they think you have accurate information. Another strategy for ensuring credibility and accuracy of information is when you are doing interviews, reframing your questions. So that means asking the same question 2 or 3 times, and every time you phrase it a different way. So, for instance, a few years back, I did some interviews on Italian American ethnic identity. So, my participants were Italian Americans from different generations. And one big question we had is, what does it mean for these people to be Italian American? So, we asked questions like, what does it mean for you to be Italian American? Later on in an interview, I asked a question like, how important is your identity to you? And on another occasion, I asked a question like, so when you hear the word Italian American, what comes to your mind? And I told them ahead of time, you may feel like I'm repeating the same question many times. That's fine. Please bear with me. But by doing this, you have a way of checking if people give you consistent responses. And that tells you that it probably is true information that they're giving you. Up next, another really important factor to credibility is the structural coherence of your analysis and in particular of your report. When you write up your research report and you hand it in to your customer or you publish it, does it flow? Does the argument flow? Is there logic to your report? Are you making sense of your data? If you find things in your data that are not consistent with each other, are you able to somehow explain those inconsistencies? For instance, let's say that you study the customers of JCPenney and how they respond to JCPenney's marketing efforts. You may find that while people say that they love JCPenney brand, they have been shopping at JCPenney less and less. Are you able to explain why that is the case? And last but not least, a really important strategy for enhancing credibility is establishing your own authority. And we talked about this already. This is telling your readers or telling your customers who you are as a researcher. In particular, it's talking about your knowledge of the field, your research skills that you have, the experience with the research methods you used and the field you have studied, and also your attitude toward this research. Where does your interest come from? What do you think about studying customer satisfaction, for example? So writing strong biographical information about yourself or any other people on the project is a key part of establishing the credibility of your findings, because remember that you are the instrument of the research in qualitative studies. All right, so this is credibility. The next criterion of quality is transferability of your data. Transferability is basically applicability of your findings to other people and to other time periods. Let's say that AstraZeneca, the big pharmaceutical company, hires you and says this, okay, we need to find out what are the best sales strategies for our sales reps. So here is a list of our top sales performers. Talk to them, shadow them, find out what works, what doesn't work. And we're going to write a nice manual for everybody else in the company based on what you find. So you go to this list and you find the top performer in the company, and you find that it's this woman. She's in Philly. You go to Philly, you shadow her for a number of days, you interview her in terms of what works for her. Now, the question is, how transferable are these findings going to be? Now, if you look at this woman, she's very attractive. She's young. And typically, attractive people, they don't need to exert as much effort in influencing other people, as much strategic effort in influencing other people as most of us. They just don't have to try as hard. That's a sad truth, and that's supported in research. Are her strategies that she uses that you observe and you find out from her, are they going to work for the 40-year-old guy in Arkansas who's also a sales rep for AstraZeneca? So that's the question. Do your findings apply to other people in the population and other time periods as well? Here are some strategies to assure transferability. First of all, having a sample that is really representative is the key. And one strategy to use to have a good sample is the so-called nominated sample. Using the AstraZeneca example, you could have a panel of people like top managers, let's say, or former salespeople, whoever knows sales and whoever knows the sales team, sit down and help you hand pick from the list of top performers the group that would be the most diverse and the most representative of the overall body of salespeople in AstraZeneca. So in other words, nominated sample, it's a sample that is nominated by a panel of judges who have enough knowledge of the population. They could also just give you a demographic description of who their salespeople are. And you yourself can handpick the sample by comparing each case from your sample to the population demographics and tweaking the sample as needed. And remember, we also talked about applicability to different time periods. So we talked about the time sampling strategy in video as well. That is conducting observations at multiple points in time or conducting interviews at multiple points in time. So if a sales rep goes into a doctor's office on a Monday morning, their sales strategies might be very different from the ones they use at the end of the week. The sales strategies at the beginning of the sales quarter will be different, probably of the ones that they use at the end of the quarter where the sales pressure is much higher. It matters sometimes more than others at what point in time to gather your observations. So now that we talked about transferability, let's talk about dependability. Dependability is the consistency of your findings. You ask yourself a question, is my instrument consistent? So you know how sometimes we have a bathroom scale. Every time you step on the bathroom scale, it gives you a different weight. But I mean, different weight every 5 minutes. You don't gain or lose weight within a time span of 5 minutes. It's just that the scale is inconsistent. Sometimes it shows too much, sometimes it shows too little. Well, in qualitative research, the instrument is not a scale, it's you. So what you ask yourself is, am I being consistent in the way I'm doing my observations and in the way I'm analyzing my data? Here's how to assure that you are dependable and consistent. The first strategy is so-called stepwise replication. You need to have 2 people or more to do this checking method. Stepwise replication is a strategy for analyzing the data where 2 researchers take 2 different portions of the data, they analyze it, and then they come together and they compare their analyses. And if presumably they have comparable data, they should have comparable results. So let's say I take the data from the AstraZeneca sales rep in Philadelphia, and my colleague takes the data from another high-performing woman in New York. And we both analyze our findings from these observations. Each of us analyzes a different person. And then we come together and we see if we can come up with commonalities between the 2. Conversely, if you don't have a fellow researcher to work with you, you can do something else. It's called the code-recode procedure. So basically, you take your data on Monday, you do an analysis. And by the way, we're going to talk about methods of analysis in our next class, so don't worry about that for now. But let's say you examine your data using whatever procedure you have chosen, and you let it sit for a few days. Then you come back to it on Monday, and without looking at your previous analysis, you analyze it again. And then you compare both analyses. And if you find that you did it in a similar way both times, you are consistent. And then another thing you can do is called peer examination. That is basically an audit of your work by another researcher. It can be somebody who works with you on your team, or just a colleague who's not on the project, but who is sufficiently versed in what you're doing that they could just have a look and see, all right, you're doing a pretty consistent job. All right. And finally, let's talk about confirmability. Confirmability refers to the neutrality of the researcher. Now, we talked about the fact that qualitative research falls mostly within the humanistic or interpretive worldview. And that worldview acknowledges that the researcher has his or her own values, and it's impossible to completely separate that from the observations. But it doesn't mean that your own attitudes and your own beliefs should overshadow your observations. Let me give you an example. If you go to do an observation or a study of the Comic Con participants, and you yourself happen to be a Comic Con fan, in fact, a really engaged one, kind of like this guy here, you really need to be careful to make sure that your own fanaticism of the Comic Con and of the entire experience does not overshadow your observations of everybody else's reality. So it's basically the question of my reality, the researcher's reality, versus my participant's reality. Which one is going to take the center stage? And what you want is you want the participant's reality to take the center stage, not your own. Here are some confirmability strategies that are useful. One is called confirmability audit. It's just like an accounting audit. Another researcher or somebody who is sufficiently familiar with the topic takes everything you've done. They take your reflexive journal, your field notes, your visual records, your anything that you wrote in terms of analysis, all of your artwork on the project, and they have a look at it and they make a judgment of how neutral are you being in this observation? How much of your own reality is seeping into this project? Some always will, but the point is, remember to keep a balance and to keep the focus on your participants' reality. So having just another pair of eyes look at your entire field of your entire body of work, that's going to give you input on how confirmable your research is. Second, one more time, it's triangulation. So if you go into Comic Con and you observe people at the event, another great thing you can do is confirm what you're seeing by having some informal interviews with them and gathering information that way. So you will be able to check your observations against what people actually say. You can also go online and read discussion forums on the topic. You could read blog posts that people write about Comic Con. So that's going to give you yet another source of data. And then another method that is always very helpful again is having a reflexive journal. If you are keeping your mind open about what you're doing, if you are thinking about what you're doing and writing about it, it's always going to be more conscious of an effort. A reflexive journal is a really important standard when you are doing your research. Another term for that is the research log or the reflexive log. You find different names for it. But the bottom line is I'm recording what I'm doing every time I'm doing something in my research project. All right, so we just covered the 4 standards of quality in qualitative research and how to meet them. They are credibility, transferability, dependability, and confirmability. So now whenever you engage in qualitative research and whenever people are paying you for information, make sure that those 4 standards